Greetings! This episode is way overdue. Let's just put it that way. Way overdue. This episode should have come out months ago, but alas, real world stuff got in the way, and hoping you can forgive me. Having said that, this is the second installment of Doctor Who Ranking, not to be confused with Doctor Who Revisited, the ongoing series where I go through every single episode of Doctor Who from 1963 all the way up to 2023 and review them. This is where I rank all the episodes that I watched by Doctor. I did the same thing with the William Hartnell series, and I was going to do the same thing with the Patrick Troughton era, but it just so happens that a little something happened right where I was getting ready to upload the last couple of Patrick Troughton episodes. So that kind of didn't happen. It went on a back burner. In the meantime, I've already finished watching all the John Pertwee era episodes. I've only started watching and reviewing the Tom Baker era episodes. But alas, now we're back to the Patrick Troughton era. So I'm going to have to use all my mental powers of memory to try and recall my thoughts and feelings on the Patrick Troughton era as a whole for the purposes of this video. And of course, as with the last one, I also have my tier list. Sorry, still haven't gotten used to this. My tier list. You can barely see me now, but you know what? I'm not the one important here. What is important is the tier list, which I am noticing is also incredibly tiny. So I hope you can, at least compared to the background around us. So hopefully you can see it properly. As you can see, I've only got 4 tiers this time, not 5 tiers. I don't remember why I had 5 tiers last time. It's been so long ago. But yeah, so I felt like 4 tiers were well enough. Sort of an S tier, A tier, B tier, and a D tier, D, C, even F tier. And you can tell that I also themed all the tiers after famous lines and quotes associated with the Second Doctor. Obviously, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, the little tune that the Second Doctor likes to play on his recorder. Splendid, another thing that the Second Doctor always used to say, a sort of pseudo catchphrase of the Second Doctor, oh my giddy aunt, and of course what he said in his final episode, sort of, when presented with possible options for regeneration. I couldn't fit the whole line on here, but the full line is this the best you've got? I've never seen such an incredible bunch. So yeah, that will be representing the bottom tier. Now I'm already gonna tell you straight off the bat, I know what my number one is going to be. Obviously, as I did with the last episode, there's gonna be one that's like a cut above the rest, like the best of the best. Actually, I kind of maybe that's why I had the 5 tier system by the end, because I'm pretty sure I put the final. Yep. I'm just looking it up. It's been so long. It's been a while since I've done this, so I kind of reserved the S tier for one episode in particular that I thought was a cut above the rest. But you know what? I don't think I'm gonna do that for this episode, for this tier list, because I don't want to. I don't have to give an explanation. So let's start off with the very first episode we were going to be talking about today, and it is the power of the Doctor. Sorry, the power of the Daleks. Power of the Doctor is a completely different episode. But yeah, the power of the Daleks, first episode of the Patrick Troughton era, and interestingly enough, not the first episode of season 4, because season 4 already started with the smugglers and the 10th planet. Yay. And just somehow awkwardly continues on to the power of the Daleks and all the rest of the second Doctor episodes. This episode, I think its only standout is the fact that it's introducing a new Doctor, and that kind of overshadows the rest of the story. which I think the introduction of the new Doctor kind of is done a bit poorly. But again, it's the first time I don't think they knew exactly what they were doing just yet. But overall, I'd say it's sort of a middle of the road tier. And you know what? Upon this, I think I decided I will be saving the S tier for the one I feel is the best. Uh, these are just sort of the decisions that come into my head while I'm making the episode. Now, as for the next episode right after it, the Highlanders, the second Doctor is a bit hard to judge because a large majority of his episodes are missing. Of course, the Power of the Daleks did get an animated treatment, an animated reconstruction. I think some important scenes from this episode did survive. The missing process can't really say the same thing for the Highlanders. The entire episode is missing, and there's no animated reconstruction in sight. So all I'm going off of is the loose cannon reconstruction with the static images and the context dialogue at the bottom, which doesn't help it much. But either way, I would say this episode really does go at the bottom. Not because it's bad, it's just it's kind of boring. There's some interesting scenes in it, but overall, it's very, very bland, and it definitely shows the lack of quality in the pure historicals that has been in Doctor Who for a while. Hence, well, they canceled it. This is the last one. This is the final historical that they did, probably for a good reason. Last of the pure historicals, to be more precise. Now, the next one that came up after it was the Underwater Menace, and some people might be getting intimidated for the wrong reasons by just looking at this image right here, thinking that, oh boy, this is what they came out with. This is what they had to work with. This is the level of makeup and costumes that they had at the time. And you know what? I say screw all that. I love this episode. I absolutely adore it. It's great. It's got one of my favorite Doctor Who villains, the most cheesiest of them all, Professor Zaroff. Nothing in the world can stop me now. I am loving this episode. This episode is going in the top, not at the top of the top, but this is going at the top, and it's gonna stay there for quite a bit because, like I said, this episode, brilliant. I love it. It's everything I love about Doctor Who in one neat little package. And thankfully, some of the episodes actually did survive, so it's even better. And now we move on to the Moon Base. Okay, so the Cybermen are back. The second Doctor had a lot of encounters with the Cybermen. This episode's okay. This is very okay. I like it. I don't love it. Again, there's some moments in it that I really love. I love some of the designs of the spacesuits, some of the moonwalk scenes. I love the usages of the companions in this episode. This is a very solid second Doctor episode. I put it well above the Daleks, the Power of the Daleks. Not good enough to make it into my A tier, but still a very, very solid episode. And I think I can say the same about the Macra Terror. I will say this: I did for this more recent rewatch. I watched the animated reconstruction, which adds a lot. Like I watched for the first couple of times I watched this episode, I watched the loose cannon reconstruction, and it wasn't really didn't really stand out to me, but the animated reconstruction does help. This episode needs to be shown in such a way. You can, if you in order to experience this story properly, you cannot go with the loose cannon reconstruction. I'm grateful for every single reconstruction that loose cannon did, because it meant we actually get the episodes could actually live again. But this is an episode that needs to be seen in live action or animated if that's the only option. And I think the animation actually even helps, because from what I've been hearing, the animatronics of the Macra were a nightmare to work with on set and barely even work properly at all, much like Bruce the Shark from Jaws. So I think the anime reconstruction was necessary. I think this episode, it's one of those rare Doctor Who episodes where it could only have worked in animation, and I am grateful for it. That being said, I don't think it cracks the top spot. I'd put it right there in the middle, between the Power of the Daleks and the Moon Base. That's a good spot for it. Next, we have the Faceless Ones. I like this episode. This episode is really cool. I think two of its parts are missing, and both got an anime reconstruction. I think I watched the anime reconstruction for this most recent rewatch, but uh, I like this episode. I don't love it. I love the. I think the makeup is incredible. I think it's a very clever setting for this whole serial, and this episode just really does do a lot of interesting twists and turns that you're just not seeing coming. So I think I'm tempted to put it at the top, the top tier, the splendid tier, but at the very back of it. I might change my mind later on, but for now, I'm gonna put it right here, and I might bump it down slightly, depending on how many episodes are gonna end up in this tier eventually. And the first season finale we're here to talk about is The Evil of the Daleks. It's great to see the Emperor again. I definitely think it's better than the Power of the Daleks. And of course, it's the last time we're going to see the Daleks for a couple of years now. It's great to be back on Skaro again. This episode has a lot of interesting twists and turns that you're not really expecting. But overall, not much to say about it. As a matter of fact, the more and more I think about it, I think Power of the Daleks is more belonging here, and Evil of the Daleks, I'd put it up here, but at the sort of at the back of it. That's just personal feelings for me. Opinions can change while I'm doing this. An opinion that I doubt is going to change at all during this entire video is my opinion on Tomb of the Cybermen. Boy, oh boy, I am so incredibly grateful that they found all 4 parts of this serial before I actually became a fan of Doctor Who and interested in watching the classic series, because I could not imagine my experience watching this episode in a loose cannon format. This episode, I love it. Start to finish. It's one of the best Cybermen stories of all time, in my opinion. I just love the Cybermen city and Telos. It's Indiana Jones in space, and I love it. I absolutely love it. I love the villain characters. The human villain characters really work for me. This is one of those cases where it's a Cyberman story, but the human villains really stand out and steal the show. And again, it could be perceived as cheesy and goofy by today's standards, but I think this is where the storytelling and the acting really shines. It's got one of my favorite Doctor moments, which is a rarity for the second Doctor, because he's definitely not one of my favorite Doctors, but one of my favorite moments in all of Doctor Who comes from this Doctor, and it comes from this episode, which is his conversation with Victoria about his family and his memories of his family. And for that reason and many more that I've already talked about, I'm putting it at the top of the splendid tier, and it's actually going to stay at the very top for quite a while now. Moving on, we jump into The Abominable Snowman. Okay, this episode has a lot of issues with it. Not the least of which the fact that some of the parts of it are missing. Of course, got an animated reconstruction, which I did not watch from this most recent rewatch. I couldn't find it, but Yeah, that being said, if I had watched the new animated reconstruction, this episode might have ranked a lot higher for me because seeing the loose cannon reconstruction with the original shots taken for this episode, I mean, just the look of Padma Sambavar. Why? Why? I get it. It's the 60s. They weren't really. Uh, they didn't really have today's standards and today's political correctness, so put it that way, back when they made this episode, and just the way they designed Padma Sambavar and a lot of the stuff involving the Buddhist monastery. To be honest, a lot of it was done poorly, but it's the usual excuse of it was the 60s. They didn't know any better. And you can't punish them for that 50, 60 years later, but just acknowledge that it's wrong. It was wrong back then when they didn't know it, and it certainly is wrong now when we do know better. So that's all I'm going to say on that. It's a shame that some of these racist yellow face moments come at the expense of some really genuinely good episodes, like this one, the abominable snowman. The Of course the racist stuff do bring it down a lot, but story wise, I still say it's better than the macro terror. It's not as good or as moderately okay as the moon base, but I would definitely put it up in that general area. Now the Ice Warriors. This one, I think I'm going to put at the A tier because I really like it. I like the Ice Warriors. It's definitely not my favorite story where they appear in, but I feel like it's a good introduction to this species, and more to the point, it is a very good showcase of the dangers of AI and how um, computers are going to take over the world someday, and humanity's over reliance on computers, which is incredibly relevant today. And I love it. It kind of goes a little too overboard with it at times. It kind of beats you over the head with it at times, but I still think that the pros far outweigh the cons with this episode. So I'm definitely going to put it above the Faceless Ones, but below the Underwater Menace. However, next we have The Enemy of the World. This episode is S tier level material. I'm not gonna reveal what my final what my proper S tier is going to be just yet, but I'll just let you know this is a strong contender for the S tier, start to finish. Now, this is an episode where I watched it the first time in the missing format. I think there's like only one or two episodes of it that aren't missing originally, and then somehow around the 50th, an early Christmas miracle happened. They found all the parts that were previously missing from this episode, and this most recent rewatch, I got to watch this episode fully in its entirety for the first time, and I absolutely adored it. I already loved this episode already, but seeing it properly the way it was meant to be shown was just paradise. Doctor Who paradise. And yeah, this episode is a very strong contender for the S tier. But here's the thing, though: is it better than Tomb of the Cybermen? Interestingly, two episodes that were missing it were completely missing at one point or another, and were miraculously found, that I really love. One I did see in the missing format, the other one I didn't. So yeah, it's very interesting, but ooh, that's actually pretty tough. I'm not sure, but I think for now I'm not gonna put Enemy of the World above Tomb of the Cybermen. Because like I said, it's a strong contender for that much elusive S tier level rank right up here. So we'll just have to wait and see on that. And next, we jump back into some more Yeti stuff with the Web of Fear. Obviously, the introduction of the Brigadier, or rather the Colonel, sorry, Lethbridge Stewart, which will be the Brigadier someday, but not today just yet. Obviously, there's some issues with this episode, mainly because some parts of it were missing, some parts of it were then found, and then the part three was then uh, mysteriously went missing because, of course, that is the episode that introduces the Lethbridge Stewart, which will be the Brigadier. So it's kind of understandable why some people would want to get their hands on it and sell it to the highest bidder. There's a lot of value to that part. Overall, I'm just looking at it as an episode, and as an episode, I feel it's a step up from the Abominable Snowman. Not a huge step up, not by a lot, but it's definitely a step up. It doesn't have the stupid, ridiculous, racist yellow face character that the Abominable Snowman had, and it really bumps it up a lot. It's another one of those episodes that really give you the emphasis on how important the military is starting to become when talking about these contemporary Doctor Who episodes, which later led to the creation of Unit in the first place. In as a storytelling thing, not the creation of Unit in universe. So for that reason, I think I'm going to bump the Faceless Ones down a notch and put the Web of Fear at the bottom of the A tier. It's not. Sorry, I just got a message. It's not super high on my list, but it's definitely good enough to be considered part of the A tier, if only at the bottom. Something that isn't good enough for any tiers besides the bottom one is a Fury from the Deep. This episode's how should I say, boring. It's another one of those. There's some cool moments in it, but it's overall disappointing, bland. The really ridiculous, stupid monsters. The method of how they stop the monsters is equally ridiculous but funny. But overall, not really a good showing. It's got a very the couple things that save it are really good emotional departure for a companion, and of course the introduction of the sonic screwdriver. And it's not just they introduced it for a random scene. The introduction of that particular device was later instrumental in defeating the monsters, kind of. So it's definitely not Highlanders, but it's still at the bottom, right there with that's a different episode, with the power of the Daleks. And then we have, of course, the Wheel in Space. Obviously, the introduction of Zoe, character that I wasn't a fan of when I first watched all of Classic Who, but she's really, really grown on me this past rewatch. And yeah, it's another brand new redesign for the Cybermen. And oh yeah, of course, the Cybermen are back. Overall, it kind of feels like a repeat of the Moon Base, which in and of itself is kind of a repeat of the 10th planet. So it's a repeat of a very iconic episode. But it's not bad. It's not too good, but it's good. It's good-ish. Do I put it above the Moon Base or below it? I think, yeah, let's put it right here next to the Moon Base and below the Faceless Ones. But then the next season opens with, of course, the Dominators. Now, the existence of the Quarks alone is enough to put it in S tier, but the rest of the episode doesn't really hold up as well. The Delkis. The planet is called Delkis, but are the people who aren't called Delkins? Not 100% sure on that, but the Delkins are kind of annoying. Really, like they're frustrating to watch. Minus that one guy who's basically like the rebel of the group. Uh, the Dominators are pretty intimidating, but I feel like this episode is really hampered by the fact that they never show up again. This episode does a lot of good setup for these new villains they introduce, but the rest of the franchise never did anything. Now, of course, it's not the fault of the episode itself. The episode does the really good build up for them, but the rest of Doctor Who doesn't follow that up as much. But like I said, I mean, I love the Quarks, but sadly, there's some cons to this episode that drags this episode down a bit. So for the Quarks alone, this episode is above the Ice Warriors, but definitely below the Underwater Menace, in my opinion. But this episode does then lead into the Mind Robber. This is another really strong contender for that top S tier spot. Just, the creativity alone. This episode, I mean, we got to see the Celestial Toymaker come back in Modern Who now. We actually got Beep the Meep in live action. I think this is the perfect candidate to be in next reintroduced, and I'm mad at myself that I did not include the Land of Fiction in my recent things I want to see come back in Doctor Who episode that I did on Greatest Show in the Galaxy. The Land of Fiction is so good, ripe with potential. It was used to such great effects on Big Finish. I love the Land of Fiction. The possibilities are literally endless with this concept, and so this episode really does take the top. Actually, you know what? Screw it. It's above Enemy of the World. I just love it so much. It's great, and I love it. And another episode that's really great, and I love it, is of course the Invasion, the proper introduction of the Brigadier as the Brigadier unit is being introduced. Another example of a Cyberman episode where the human villain is the standout. I mean, Tobias Vaughn is such an iconic, great Doctor Who villain. A bit of a step up from the other Kevin Stoney villain, which is Mavic Chen, for reasons that I covered already. But just this episode is really great. It does take a while until you realize it's actually a Cyberman story. But overall, like all 8 parts, start to finish, it's a very well done episode, very well made, and it is right now at the 3rd place. Taking 3rd place. It's not by any chance a contender for the elusive top tier that I keep mentioning, but it's still really, really good to take one of the top 3 spots. Crotons, though. For some reason, I remember liking this episode a lot more when I watched it for the first couple of times. Not so much in this episode. I mean, it's cool, it's interesting, it's innovative, it's inventive, but to an extent. So I think it's right between the Abominable Snowman and the Macra Terror. Now, the Seeds of Death, however, not to be confused with the Seeds of Doom, this episode's, I think, a better showing for the Ice Warriors. I really like the usage of the Ice Warriors in this story, and it's a really great threat. They really went out of their way to establish planet Earth in a very specific way with this episode, and I love how they. I just really love the way they represented planet Earth in this episode. It's a really great threat. It's a season finale level threat for the Doctor to face, and it's one of the good ones. It's one of the good ones, but it's not as good as the Underwater Menace. I'm sorry, I just love Zaroff too much. I guess apparently the space pirates. One of these days, I need someone to explain to me why everyone seems to love this episode so much. Like, I get it. It's Robert Holmes. I think it's the first Robert Holmes penned story. It's great. It's a great space opera and whatnot. But I stand by what I said in my review for it on Doctor Who Revisited. Go ahead and check that one up. It feels like it's a Star Trek episode that just happens to feature the Doctor and friends. Like, this doesn't feel like a Doctor Who episode. It feels like a Star Trek episode, and maybe that's um why I don't love it as much, is because there's a bit of a disconnect. And I love Star Trek for the most part. There's a lot of episodes I have issues with. There's a lot of problems I don't like about Star Trek, but overall, I consider myself a Star Trek fan. But I feel like when I'm watching a Doctor Who episode, I much rather watch a Doctor Who episode than a Star Trek episode. There are exceptions to the rule, obviously, here and there, but for the most part, I feel like this episode is too Star Trekky uh, at this point. So it's definitely going at the bottom, but it's at the top of the bottom because, like I said, it's a very well made episode. Just really doesn't feel like a Doctor Who episode. It's more of a Star Trek episode, and that's really what bums it down for me. And finally, we have the War Games. I'm just gonna go ahead and say it. This episode is my top tier. Like, bar none, this episode is the best second Doctor episode, in my opinion. And not just that, I honestly think it's my favorite regeneration story. Partly because you hardly even know it's a regeneration story until, like, literally the final part. And oh my goodness, it's a 10-part serial. Massive. It's crazy. And I mean, just the way that this episode sets up the big, massive, expensive story that you're about to see, and very slowly trickles it down and gives it to you in small bites, is amazing. Perfect. This episode's got perfect pacing, perfect setup, perfect build up to everything that's about to come. And oh my god, the scale of this episode, the number of people, the number of characters in this episode. And on top of that, it's also setting up Gallifrey. Even though we don't know it's called Gallifrey just yet, it's setting up the Time Lords. The Time Lords finally properly show up, finally being named, dropped as Time Lords. Obviously, the Warlords are villains that could have been reused in the show. Actually, considering what happens in the story itself, they probably couldn't. But they could have been some of the great Doctor Who villains. Of course, they were reused in a novel that came out back in the 90s. Great novel, by the way. I really love the usage of the Warlords in that one. But overall, just from the War Chief, the Warlord, the other smaller warlords that are running around. I mean, this episode mainly sets up the warlords as the villains. Of course, the warlord himself, the chief warlord himself, is the main villain overall, and of course, the war chief, the Time Lord villain, is prominent as well. But all the other lesser warlords are great as well. I mean, just this episode, this is what Doctor Who is capable of when it's pushed to the limits of its creativity. Like, you get an episode like this where you get wars from all across human history mashed together in a sort of battle world. It's almost like the Marvel Secret Wars in a way, and I just love being part of that big, massive joyride of an episode. And yeah, so this is my list. This is my tier list, my tier ranking for all these second Doctor episodes. Surprisingly, not a lot of episodes. But I think I did a good job. The Second Doctor's era is kind of an era where I like the episodes themselves less than I love the Doctor himself. If that makes any sense. I know that some of the quintessential Doctor stuff came from this era, like, of course, the sonic screwdriver, the jelly babies, the more comedic approach to him. Obviously, I mean, I just mentioned the Time Lords, but overall, again, I'm not the biggest fan of the Second Doctor as a Doctor, but I do feel like he had some of the better stories to him, and that really helped carry him through the very turbulent 3 years that Patrick Troughton was in the role. Having said that, I think that's all I can say for the Second Doctor era. I really enjoyed doing this list. I really should have done this a very long time ago, but like I said, sadly, things got in the way. Real world stuff uh, interfered, and at least I finally got to get that out of my system and do this video that I should have done. So yeah, hopefully I can upload it at not a very awkward time to upload this. I mean, let's face it, it's been a while since I should have uploaded it. It's just going to be awkward no matter what I do. So I might as well just upload it and be done with it. So yeah, that's it for now. That's it for me in this episode. And I'll see you in the next one. Now I just got to record the John Pertwee ranking and have it sit on the shelf for a bit until I can upload it after I've uploaded all of the John Pertwee Doctor Who Revisited episodes. So thank you for watching if you have. And until then, goodbye for now. Oh my giddy aunt! Hi there! Thank you for watching the video. And if you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and tell your friends. I'll see you next time.